Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes just for everyone to get logged into the webinar here, and then we'll begin. All right, we'll go ahead and start, and we'll kind of do the introductions as people are in the beginning of this and as people are still logging on. So welcome, everyone, to our second event in the 2023-24 Salinger Connect series. We're very thankful to our awesome panelists that we have here on the call tonight, taking time out of their busy schedules to participate in this discussion. On the call, we have a mixture of Salinger students, we have alumni, faculty, administrators. My name is Trish Tarrant. I am the program director, and I'm very excited about tonight's topic. Predictive analytics is crucial for marketing decisions. It really enables businesses to make informed and data-driven decisions to enhance their marketing strategies. I know we're all going to learn a tremendous amount tonight. One quick item before we start, if you do have questions as we're going through the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your bottom bar there, and we'll monitor those as the event is going on and answer those. So without further ado, I will turn this over to our moderator and a professor in our program and executive in residence, Auburn Bell. Auburn?
Thanks, Trish, and welcome to everyone. It's great to have you here, and we appreciate the time you're spending with us, and hopefully we can make everyone a little smarter in and around predictive analytics. So, oops. I'm gonna move down slides. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Let me begin by introducing our esteemed panelists, going from left to right. So we have Colin Kendall. Colin is the Chief Marketing Officer at SC&H, which is a consulting firm headquartered here just north of Baltimore. Colin is frequently a guest speaker in our marketing MBA and marketing MBA and undergrad classes, as well as is very generous with his time in mentoring students, and has taken on interns from time to time, as well as hired some students. Next, we have Maura McCaffrey. Maura is at McCormick, one of my absolute favorite companies in the world, also headquartered here in Baltimore and a global organization. She is Senior Director, Digital Media and Advertising Performance for the organization. And then next, we have Brandon Parrott-Sheffer. Brandon is with Deloitte, based in Chicago. He is head of polycultural research, ethos, with Deloitte Digital. And then last but not least, we have Meredith Quirk. Excuse me. Meredith is vice president of data analysis at Digitas, and she comes to us from Boston. She's an alum, and I know that because she was a student, graduated in 2015, and it's been great fun to watch her evolve and her professional career. I thought as we kick into this, before we get into the discussion part, it would be interesting, and to follow up on Trish's point, to really have a look at, the size of this market. And I think that really demonstrates the predictive analytics market, really demonstrates, you know, in a huge way, just the number of organizations and companies around the globe that are using predictive analytics in their performance measurement. Moving from about 10 billion to about 67 billion in 2032. So, a CAGR of 21%, which is phenomenal. I think we'd be hard pressed to look at any sector out there that's growing that quickly these days. So, and I think again that's attributed to just all the interest in it, the investments being made in it by organizations, and realizing and beginning to understand just the value it adds to everything they do. I think this chart shows, kind of the early adopters, right? So principally banks, financial institutions, and insurance companies, and then the retail and e-commerce sector, which when you think about it, and all of those being very sort of customer centric, lots of needs to segment data, do predictive kinds of exercises in and around customer usage and experiences. Right now they make up about 60% of end user share, followed by telecom and transportation. I think that other segment is going to get larger over the next 5 years and be consistent growth that's projected, and this chart will become a lot more sliced and bifurcated. And then I think, in realizing we've got a number of undergrad students on this, it's really exciting to look at. And this is the reference here. The source is the Department of Labor. To look at the projection of just average job growth over the next 6 years, 5 years, excuse me, which is just above flat at 5.2%. But look where it is in terms of data analyst job growth, specifically at plus 20%. And I think that just again points to the number of companies that are jumping in or have jumped into the analytics and performance space. Okay. Let's jump now into the Q&A part of our discussion. I think the way we framed our conversation tonight is to really look at Q&A across 7 different segments. So the evolution and relationship with data science that predictive analytics has, how it works, what are the opportunities and the derived benefits, some real world examples. I think we've got, our panelists will be able to kind of give us, some insight as to how they use predictive analytics in their everyday programs, and how they're deriving benefits organization from their work. And then I think we had a number of participant questions around the skill sets involved to get a role with this area. And so we've got a number of questions we'll go through there. And then finally, taking a look at what the future holds and where this is going long term. So the first order here is really kind of defining the area of predictive analytics and its relationship with data and data applications and intelligence. And I think to start, Brandon, could you give us your perspective on that?
Sure. So what it is and what its applications are, I think, is a really great, big, bold question overall. So hi, everyone. How I would answer that is I would say that predictive analytics is really any use of data, statistical, and machine learning that is basically gazing into the crystal ball of what's going to happen. So the way that I often think about that is really in its use cases. It started a lot, I would say, in my world at least, by the understanding of being able to predict behavioral trends or customer trends or demands or expectations, but has really become a way that we are able to identify next best fit actions, both in the short term and the long term, which is just a really critical way to view how to make decisions based on kind of that risk assessment.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-ups from other panelists on that thoughts?
No, I think Brandon explained that really nicely. And I think the crystal ball piece is really what's prevalent. And just thinking ahead to, I know part of this conversation is sort of what's the longevity or demand for this type of skill set. I would say it's very high demand right now. We see a lot of clients from an agency perspective continue to sort of utilize this technology and information. And, we hear so much, especially from, I work with Bank of America, the CMO of Bank of America or the president is everything has to be backed by data. Every investment we make has to have some sort of, cornerstone of this is going to be successful in terms of this goal. And really that's our job, is to make sure that it is to a degree, or at least have an understanding of, what do we need to apply now from a data perspective in the strategy early on and throughout to make sure that we're sticking on that course. So Brandon, I think you did a great job explaining that, but also just elaborating on sort of the demand and need for that level of knowledge and skill.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. I think, Brandon, back to you for 1 second. So one of your thoughts was that you wanted to expand on was, from an organizational standpoint, who should be involved in an organization to develop, manage, and assess both the overall predictive strategy, but applying the insights to the work?
For sure. And Colin, I saw you come off mute too, so I'll tap over to you in a second also. But I think it's actually building off of Meredith, what you just said. The answer is everybody. And I think it's kind of an obvious answer of everybody. There's a data science team, there's a data protection team, there is a product engineering team, there is a customer excellence and adoption team, there's employee engagement, there's finance. Everyone has a seat in this conversation. And they have, I would say, over 4 key moments are the really critical moments you need everyone at the table. The first, and Meredith, I'm going to probably borrow a little bit of what you're saying there. The first is that articulation of that vision. Why is this relevant to the market, and what is going to drive our impact within it? Second is the identification of risks. What's going to stand in our way? What are the legal and compliance risks, but also what are the behavioral risks? What do we have to gain and lose from this? Third is the organizational adoption gaps. This is going to be a new language for a lot of people. Yes, this is an existing conversation, but it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. So who specifically is going to be doing that change management? And then the last is, how are you validating that performance? What are the metrics that you should have agreed upon in that visioning statement that you're going to measure to see, did we actually have that impact? And across all of that is this question of, how are you operating both as a capital investment? How are you responsible for the finances and the gain of all of this, as well as the commercial viability of it? How are people going to adopt and use it? Is that going to retain engagement, et cetera? And so as you think about that, that is an organizational decision-making process, not just a, can we do this technologically process. Colin, I don't know if that still tees up what you were going to go for, but feel free to redirect too.
A little bit, but my screen entered into like an immersive view, so I see like a massive screen with a bunch of like aliens in the bottom, like hanging out. Did anyone else see that? It completely threw me off. So what I was going to say was, it's interesting because when I hear you talk about all the different roles involved, Brandon, it's one, awesome, because I see the organization that you're coming from, and I'm thinking about all the different divisions, and I can imagine the size of Digitas and McCormick and some of your clients. And then I look at our firm, where we're about 3, when we started doing even just basic analytics and kind of data, the fundamentals of data infrastructure, we were probably 300, 350, maybe a little bit before that. It was almost like during the pandemic is when we started a data analytics practice. And the interesting spot was, you were starting to have people who, we're historically an accounting firm. There's a ton of data there, right? And you're immersed with client data since inception, but now you're looking at it in a completely different lens. And so we almost had to have people at the table that had no idea how to even, turn on their computer sometimes, but they could do one hell of a tax return. And so one of the things is also that learning curve of understanding how the technology and how the numbers and how the data came together. And so it kind of changed who was at the seat, who had the seats at the table when we first started, because you didn't really have the level of expertise that we have now, and not the level of aptitude to bring to the conversation. So, and we had executive level, C-suite, you had different divisions and their leaders, and everyone's kind of learning on the go, which was pretty cool. We're a much more mature organization and have kind of practices that advise clients now. But it was wild at the beginning in terms of really thinking about, no one really knew a lot of people didn't know what prescriptive analytics was yet. It was just basic analytics and understanding, do we even have clean data? And so that was interesting, the foundation for us.
Let's kick it over. I think Maura, this is perfect for you to jump in. So talking a little bit about, how it works, and the organizational processes in terms of, defining the thesis and goals, acquiring and accessing the data, which, in global firms, I know is not easy. And then integrating the appropriate model and developing the insights.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I'm in marketing analytics now. I had started off my career many moons ago, actually running kind of regression models, running price elasticity models, all that kind of stuff, and then moved into a business analytics role. And now I'm in more of a marketing analytics role. It's been really interesting to see how the space has evolved. As I think about the tools that are available now to learn business analytics, or specifically predictive analytics, it looks a lot different. The space looks a lot different today than it did 5 years ago, let alone 15 years ago. So, at one point, in order to understand predictive analytics, you needed a background in some type of econometrics or some type of data science, right? You needed to learn all the math and all of the matrix algebra and all that yucky stuff. And now, you can go on Udemy or on LinkedIn Learning and take a class and be pretty darn proficient at it, which is really just remarkable and really impressive, and not necessarily even need to know how to code, which is awesome. So as I think about, some of the barriers, I think it may have been Colin, talked about this a moment ago. At the end of the day, one of the cornerstones of having a good model is having good data. And that's really like kind of the grueling, boring part of running the models, right? Like, you've just got to get your data in order. And that's kind of like, that's the grunt work. But it's one of those garbage in, garbage out. If you have crummy data, or if you have missing data, or if you have a data set that you're trying to extrapolate far too much off of, like, you're going to wind up with a goofy model. So getting the data right, I think, is critical. And then I think the other thing that's sort of before you start, then you run the model, et cetera. And then I think the other piece that really makes it sing is the ability to interpret the data for a lay audience, right? Nobody needs to know what your p-value is or what your t-statistic is or blah, 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 right? But what does it mean? What does this mean for the next business decision that I'm going to make? What does this mean for the next action that I am looking to take, and what are the guardrails that I need to operate within, right? And I think that's something that I've always tried to kind of impart upon people, like, hey, look, this is what the model's telling me, this is what the indicated action would be, but this is where the model is not going to provide us a whole lot of guidance. Like, if you're wondering, hey, should I increase my ad spend by 40%, and you've never increased your ad spend to that level before in all of eternity, the model is not going to be much help, right? So, like, the model is, it's bound by the data that you give it. And so, and so pushing it beyond its limits is often done with, like, sort of buyer beware type of thing. So I think as we think about explaining the outputs of these types of predictive models, whether it's machine learning or neural networks or just, basic regression, I think it's helping people to understand what it means in a real world business context, but also helping people to understand where the natural limitations reside.
Thank you. And I think along those lines, Colin, I know something that's near and dear to your heart is, how the organization connects those predictive analytics and the work there within in marketing to organizational wide revenue growth. And really, having adoption, beyond and showing value beyond just marketing. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the way Maura put that too is perfect in terms of And I think it's very important for really any professional, honestly. But as we think about today's audience and a lot of you that are going to be starting out fresh in your careers or just kind of getting started, it's not what you want to say, it's what they need to hear, what they're looking to know. And the ability to really translate what you know and what you're really good at to what your audience is looking to hear and what they need to learn. That's the part where you really start to level up and grow within your career. And the same thing is marketing to the marketing department versus the executives. Like they don't care about traffic, impressions, click-through rate, ROAS. Like they don't care about all of these acronyms. What they really want to know is the impact on the business. And so what we've really worked hard doing in terms of building a revenue focused marketing team. And Auburn, you know, this one of the things that drives me nuts is when, marketing's just overhead, right? Like it's one of the first things to be cut. Like, no, absolutely not. Marketing is one of the closest ways that you can actually make an impact on the bottom line without even being client facing. And so I think the biggest thing that we attempt to do is think about what are some of the business goals and what are some of the key leaders and the key stakeholders at the organization? What do they want to know about? And that's how we've attempted to leverage data and predictive analytics or just any type of analytics to really think about how we're telling a story with that data. And something that we've done is really work with our internal teams to comb through CRM data, sales data, and then start to marry up all of the sales data and the performance data in terms of really thinking about who are we selling to, what services are they buying, how many services are they buying. And that's where some of the coolest parts that we've started to apply predictive analytics is really thinking about our customer base and what are their tendencies and what causes them to perhaps work with 2 groups versus 3 groups versus 4 groups. And that's been huge for us. We have a lot of that data in a Power BI dashboard that is very digestible. It's something that you can sit in front of your executives and show them like exactly who's working with whom and how we could do more. So it's thinking about your audience. It's not dumbing it down, but it's trying to make sure that you're not talking how you talk, but talking how they understand. And that's really critical.
Thank you. And Brandon,
just-
I think, go ahead, go. No,
I
please.
just love to underscore that because Moira and Colin, like for anyone listening, like that is not a small point. That I have seen careers made and destroyed based on the power of storytelling, which is such an underrepresented thing in this industry. Most people who get into this get because they love the math side of it, they love the logic side of it, they love the puzzles. That's us. We can talk to ourselves like that till the cows come home. But I tell my team all the time, you are not paid to be a researcher. You are paid to be content producers. You are paid to be storytellers. You are paid to be educators. And that cannot be underscored enough. Like, I love that you both brought that up.
Yeah, and I would just say, something I kind of preach to my students all the time is that, the number of times that, I sat in any number of untold meetings and watch people just put up these really pretty slides, right? And well, market share lost, 5% this year. Okay, next slide. And there was no context, right? There was no square around it. What does that mean? What does it mean to our revenues? What does it mean to our profitability? What does it mean to, the supply chain, right? I mean, there's just all kind of things, different ways you can take, those conversations and have an impact, have that data impact, a lot of places and a lot of people in a positive way across the company, across the organization. So I think we're all saying the same thing there. Brandon, you had one other thought under this segment, I think, in terms of preparation of data, to ensure it's clean and accurate, for an effective foundation. And you have a couple of thoughts on that, I think.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I think, Maura, you hit a lot of it, so I'm not going to probably spend too much time because a lot of it is garbage in, garbage out. That we have to remember we live in a world where we are inundated with data because for the past 5 to 7 years, data has been a massive commodity that has been bought and sold, which means that the quality has not been what's driven it. It's the intrigue and the interest. And I will also say, you know, probably many of us have been in those calls too, that the push from the industry to always have novel data, to be consistently innovative in the way we're approaching data, is not necessarily the way data happens. And so again, there's a lot of information to be fearful on that. What I would highly recommend on that is a couple things when you're doing that. One of which is there's no greater power than your logic test sometimes. Does this fit with what other people are saying? If I'm the only one saying this, is there a reason I'm the only one saying it? Have other people tried going down this path before? And really kind of hold yourself accountable to that. The second in terms of that, or the other is in terms of speed, the what I will push on everyone right now is there is a push to do things faster and faster and faster, and that is causing quality control processes to break down. It is causing those things to be short-sighted, that our industry cannot survive if we keep doing that. And so that's the only other thing that I would say is just there's no such power, especially in the age of AI right now, as the human audit. And there's thousands of resources out there that we can probably talk about, and I'm sure auditing will come up again and again here. But going through a rigorous multi-person, multiple backgrounds, multiple world perspectives, et cetera, looking at the same data is a critical component right now.
If I might real quick, I just wanted to kind of like echo that. I think that one of the big terms that's been thrown around over the last, I don't know, decade has been big data. And I think it's sort of been the sexy term. And I think that, I don't know, I guess I'm a little skeptical of it, because I think that data for the sake of data is useless unless you have like a sentient mind who can interpret it and derive insights from it, right? Like a monkey can manipulate data, but you need somebody who can actually kind of tell you what it all means, and again, what the implications of it are. So I feel like big data kind of got its moment in the sun, and I think that it started to quell a little bit because I think it only captures half the story.
Great point. Great point. So let's, Meredith, let's take this over to you. So in terms of when we think about the opportunities for data and predictive analytics and beneficial insights that are derived, can you talk a little bit about, your experience and that is, but relative to, could be customization, audience, customer segmentation, refinement, et cetera.
Yeah, of course. So just also for some background, my specialty is social analytics, so it's a bit more niche. But I do think all of those points are sort of the inlays of what we can do, especially right now. What's really relevant is that audience segmentation or audience design work. I think part of that can really provide not just validation, but also challenging clients to really understand the market, right? So of course, when you work for a big bank, they think they know who their customers are. They have some limited data to suggest, these are the people who are opening accounts or, using Zelle products. But in reality, it's a whole new demographic. And I think part of what we can do with analytics and predictive analytics is to help use this data to sort of challenge that perception and serve this up in a way of, let's figure out a way to test and learn a little bit more, or let's figure out a way to maybe isolate this or parse it into the strategy in a way that we can expand sort of the opportunity we're doing, and kind of outside of just sort of the, perception challenge of what we typically do as marketers, or what we sometimes do as marketers. So I think that's definitely a big one that's pretty top of mind right now, especially in the social front.
Okay. Follow-ups to that? Those thoughts?
The follow-up I'd just add on to that, because I think, Meredith, you hit a lot of this on there too, which is like, remember your users have autonomy and decision making and may not care about you, and actually probably don't. And I say that it's such a harsh and hard lesson to learn regularly and all the time, but because you put so much passion into the idea we have that we sometimes forget that that's coming from inside of us, and that's not natural to the audiences we're going to talk about. And so when we acknowledge that, I do think the other opportunity for predictive analytics and marketing, and just predictive analytics in general, is how we can move beyond popularity driven models within that, so that we can bring about real and realistic individualization and customization. We can answer that call especially at the polycultural, multicultural, diverse world that we live in, especially within the geopolitical world we live in, not in a way that perpetuates and continues to create silos, because these cultural networks should have a point of continuity in your messaging. It should be the consistent reality. And if you are giving inconsistent messages to different audiences, you will be found out. That is something we have definitely seen in this day and age. But being able to actually mathematically no longer create false norms in the data, no longer, center false majorities in the data, doing that in a way that actually allows us to dynamically engage, I think is, like, to me, the most exciting frontier of what predictive analytics and machine learning has to offer.
Okay, thank you. So there was, and maybe related a little bit to that, Brandon, there was a question from one of our participants around discussing our thoughts on how to approach ethical questions about the use of analytics and marketing. Are there ethical boundaries you observe with respect to the type of data you use, the type of product or services marketed, or the type of consumers targeted? If so, are those boundaries widely accepted in your industries, or does it vary widely by company?
Yeah. I'd love to hear everyone's answer on this, not only because I feel like I'm hogging the mic a little bit, but just because I think it's such a big, and there's no right answer to this question right now. For me, the biggest two things that stand as truths. One is voluntary transparency standards being adopted across the board. We know that's not happening right now, but it is a necessary next step, not only in how the systems were built and who built them, but who reviewed them, who did the audit, as well as where they're used in your product experience and your service experience. Because there's a lot of things that are being automated or being predicted, or data that's being used, with GDPR standards or DPIA compliance. If you're not familiar with either of those two acronyms, highly recommend looking them up, because those are, those transparency standards of what's being used. The other, and it kind of with that, is I highly recommend, and we've been working with a lot of our clients to adopt a bias as an expectation standard. So not to say, let's look for if there is bias, but to say, let's look to where there is bias, because there will be, and there is no way for any machine learning, especially not to have bias, because it has to have the rules that you fed to it. And so those two kind of mentality shifts, I think, have been the biggest impact for us. But Colin, Meredith, Moira, I don't know if y'all have seen anything bigger or same.
I'll chime in. I think some of you guys are beyond even where I am from a data standpoint. I think I'm not, some of you are immersed in that world of analytics and really able to get into the depths of that. I think the interesting part when we talk about kind of standards, a lack of uniformity, and just kind of at times a little bit of the wild, wild west. What I think is, from an overall marketing standpoint, that I'm hopeful with, is that I think that as things start to change, it'll be very interesting once there are standards, once there are things like cookieless worlds, right? Like, I think it rewards the creative. It rewards those that really get to know their audience, get to know their customers, get to know their clients, and really makes them work to create really good experiences, because you're not relying so much on as much of the facade or some of the surface level marketing. Like, you really have to think about, and I think this is where you think about kind of the TikTok generation, you think about the creator, I'm not getting the right wording correct, right? But like kind of the content creators of today. I'm really excited to see how analytics and content can really create some really cool things. So as it relates to the legitimacy and the kind of the ethics in data, I think that I'm hopeful that we can get to a point of standardization and uniformity sooner than later, because I think it will be really cool to kind of level the playing field and see how a lot of the content creators really start to separate themselves, and the really good marketers really start to think about that at the end of the day, as a marketer, I believe that your best possible data is data from the clients and the customers that you're talking to, truly understanding what do they want and why, and figuring out all the different micro moments along the way that you need to be in front of them with what they're looking for when they, to Brandon's point from before, when they want to make that decision. And so that's my take on things.
Thank you, Colin. There's a number of questions relative to skill sets from participants and what kinds of certifications, what kinds of courses, what kinds of roles they look to at the beginning of their careers that prepare them to jump into a data analysis role for a company, move up the ranks. One of the things that I say to my students all the time is, if you go on Indeed or you go to a company, like the McCormick's website, often you'll see those entry level spots that are in and around, some component of accessing, managing, and kind of diving into data. So there's, as the initial chart showed, there's lots of opportunities, but I think there's a real hunger to, how can I best prepare ourselves. So if you guys could shed some light on that would be terrific. Meredith, you want to take that maybe first?
Sure. Yeah, I would say just from my experience too, and again, I think sort of the best way to get that experience is to just, do an internship or take Auburn, you just said, but an entry level job, within an agency or a company that provides that level of opportunity. I think for me personally, starting, like I mentioned, I started really as a social strategist trader, but knowing the demand for analytics and things like predictive analytics and all this work, that's where I started to sort of shift my career focus later on, but still have this social anchor. So I think, if there's something you're really interested in when it comes to the marketing sphere, whether it is, heading right into analytics or a data science analyst role, go for it. That's where you can get the best return early on. But, if there's something that's interesting, whether it's social or programmatic trading or something else within, the digital sphere, that's also going to be great. I think, Brandon, you brought up GDPR, CCPA, that's all stuff you'll know on the spot. And as you continue to sort of find your way to weave into more of this analytics interest or role or skill set, that's where you can determine, if this is something I want to tackle more and more of, or maybe I want to take another career path. So I think for me, best practice is just getting the experience and finding sort of what you're interested in and starting to parallel that with what, the demand in the marketplace is.
If I might add, I would say yes to everything Meredith just indicated. I think that sort of, sample size of one here, but I would argue that learning R or Python is never going to hurt you. I think that R in some ways feels like Excel of 10 years ago. It's a great skill to have. It's not hard to learn. There's tons of material on the web to kind of help you along. It's actually it's basically like a grassroots alternative to some software that was developed a million years ago that cost a ton of money. So there was a software called SAS that cost a bunch of money. A bunch of guys were like, well, gosh, we don't want to pay those licensing fees. We're just going to develop this R software, and along came R. And so I would say, if you have free time, I think it's time well spent to learn one of those two. It depends on who you ask, which one is better. And then along with that comes sort of the relevant application. You can use those languages to do any variety of things. If you want to go kind of predictive analytics, then there's plenty of classes on predictive analytics. If you just want to do basic data manipulation, they're great for that. But I just think that it's sort of like, being able to speak Mandarin. It's always going to serve you well, so yeah.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have a question from a faculty member here in the chat room. What issues has the panel seen in the democratization of analytics? We're now putting powerful tools into the hands of users and allowing them to be more proactive, to be decision makers. What are the downsides of doing this?
I'll take a stab at answering that. I'm going to answer it in a little bit of a consulting sort of way, which is, I think every downside that is there is a positive as well. And I think, Colin, you kind of hit on it earlier too, which, and like with the creator comments there, that basically these tools are democratizing access to what it means to fundamentally run your business. And the same way that like what we've seen with like micro networks in the media and entertainment industry, that you can basically start your own media network with a Vimeo and a Discord, you know, that the startup costs of building your own platform have never been cheaper. And with that is both the advantage of giving people who have enormous skill and opportunity, but maybe not the capital means to engage in it, or don't want to kind of play by the rules, the opportunity to succeed, as much as it's, you know, the people who would use those systems for harm. And so I think we talk a lot about the kind of metaphysical and philosophical problems of what AI and machine learning and predictive analytics has to do for the world. But for everything that it does, it also opens up that opportunity as well. So to me, the question is answered by, in some ways, how strong can we advocate for those kind of rigors and standards that we talked about earlier, so that that democratization is empowering, versus if those standards don't exist, then that democratization just basically creates a kind of wild metaverse, you know?
Sure, thanks.
Colin,
I
you can
think,
say.
yeah, I would shout out Uncle Ben on this one. I think the great power, with great power comes great responsibility, is where I would go here. I think analytics data is everywhere. I mean, you think about the Ravens are playing the Bengals tonight, right? And the Ravens, in the span of like 5 years, have become an analytics obsessed football team. Now, almost every decision that they make on the field starts with data, but then you have humans out there thinking about, is this right? Like, you have human emotion or human wisdom stepping in and thinking about, is this actually the right decision? Is this actually the right situational move? And so I think about, when you look at, I believe that the biggest risk to everyone having access to analytics is them not knowing how to analyze it and actually make a decision off of it. I believe that there's even folks within my team that it's so cool to see some of them using these platforms and using this data to try to make some recommendations, make some decisions. And sometimes it's almost like you have to kind of pull them back a little bit and make sure, don't rush to judgment, right? Like, think about, how much data do we have? How much time have we put into this? It's when you're looking at predictive modeling and predictive analytics, I think you have a lot more. But when you're just starting out with the foundational elements, you really have to be careful that you don't take this too far, because it can be exciting and enticing to say, oh, this is a data-driven decision, right? Like, that makes someone sound instantly more credible, except for probably everyone that's on this call. It's like, I actually trust you less maybe now. But it's become something that you feel like you're making a better decision because it's backed by data. But for a lot of the reasons that we've already discussed, just because it's backed by data doesn't mean it's backed by good data. So it's sort of like with anything else, you got to be responsible. But I think it's great that all of you are growing up with such advanced tools at your disposal, and I remain excited to see what we do with it. I'm really excited for my kids to get immersed in this world, and I think that there's always going to be risks and rewards and threats, and you just hope that there's more good than bad, and just kind of keep pushing forward.
If I could, Robert, just really quick, one clarifying thing too as well, that just it bears mentioning is, and because I think a lot of, Colin, I hear so much in yours of like, brings me back to like the days when we were talking about Wikipedia when I was a senior in college, you know, like we had the same conversation. There's all this misinformation on there. People are citing it. Like that's been the conversation about the internet, you know, since the 90s, probably since the 60s, you know. Where it concerns me, I will say, like, if there are any hard walls that I think we need to be very, very mindful of, are when it affects someone's ability to eat, someone's ability to earn and keep money, and someone's health and well-being, which are three large applications right now of predictive analytics. So we, like, I don't know how many of you guys are following the news. Like, there have been stories about like upon birth, giving a likelihood of criminal score to a baby. And like that type of decision making that needs to be a hard line. Anything, especially that is going to have disparate racial outcomes, needs to be a hard line. We need to especially lock hands right now as a community to say, until we have those standards, we'll fine playing in this sandbox. That's not on the table right now.
Thanks, Brandon. I think if I can drop one more sports analogy in there, just to demonstrate the impact that data is having, far and wide, is when you think about on the baseball side of the equation, the Astros up until the 2013-14 season were at best, a stellar baseball team or one notch up, and they deployed and invested heavily in data to the point where it was driving who was moving up from the minors to the majors, who was going down, right? And I think for the last 5-7 years, they've been in the World Series 4 times, they've won 3 times, and they've been in the playoffs, I think, all in 5 or 6 times. So a lot of success there, and that whole team, a lot of that team has been moved here to Baltimore to the Orioles, right? And so it's been fun to watch, how that's evolved, how, Baltimore 5 years ago had 1 data person, and I think they have a team of 17 or 18 people these days that are doing the same thing, and have moved them into being a competitor. So it's been a lot of fun to watch from that perspective. So we're good on time. Just a couple more areas to cover. I thought, one thing that would, I think, find beneficial is if a couple of our panelists could maybe kind of give like a mini case, something they were involved in with a client or internally with a program, Colin or friend, and kind of kind of the macro view from how it started, what you were trying to accomplish, and then how data sort of informed the progress and the outcome.
I can kick us off if we want, because I have one that I love. It
Okay,
really is. It was one of my first big experiences with it, so like it's a little dated now, but like not too far.
Yeah.
Because we're staying on the sports analogies. I had an opportunity to help be part of the team that redesigned Wrigley Field with the Cubs, and as a Chicagoan, as a lifelong Cubs fan, it was a huge opportunity. Loved every moment of it. And the way we were able to interweave behavioral analytics and predictive analytics throughout the entire piece got us to a level of sophistication that not only understood what are the most likely actions you're going to do, how likely are people going to buy merchandise and buy food and do this thing, blah, blah, blah. It actually allowed us to get to the level of knowledge of like, if you are a tourist, you are most likely to answer through this door. If you live in the suburbs, the north suburbs, you are most likely to enter through this door. When you enter through that door, depending on where you came from, here is the likelihood that you ate outside of the park, where you ate, and what you ate. And then if you hadn't eaten, what you were most likely to look for. And then if you ordered that, what was most likely to be your second purchase. And so we were able to basically intuitively design the entire space around like, what are you looking for? Which my favorite included, we found that there's a small group of people, probably about 10% of the population, that didn't like beer and didn't like wine. They wanted like craft cocktails and they wanted like some sort of fun food thing, but they wanted to have to find it. And so we were able to develop this like mobile, moving, kind of constantly changing activation that like became this hidden kept secret for people who weren't looking for the standard engagement fare. And so like that just type of like being able again to personalize at that level was just so exciting. Like it genuinely was.
Story. It's a great story. Anyone else? So we can move on to I think our final topic, and just thinking about the future and what it holds. Maybe Meredith, if you can kick us off and just talk a little bit about thoughts on how the area is going to evolve. What it will mean beneficially for your organization as a consultant, but then also for your clients. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think, I know we sort of touched on this in the beginning, but I think sort of the adoption of it is becoming more and more from a client perspective, and I think going back to what we were talking about, presenting it in sort of lay audience terms. That's becoming more of a focus of like having a vernacular where you can understand the specifics and how to utilize it, but then also present it to people who do not do, predictive analytics or don't have an analytics background whatsoever. And I think the more we see that shift, even from an agency perspective or sort of from a marketing perspective, the demand for this is going up. We just have this massive partnership with Epsilon for Bank of America. There's more investment in this as a resource for brands. That again, there's more job openings happening within data science or analytics that are going to tap into this. It's becoming more ingrained in start to finish planning, but also audience utilization, understanding who your audience is. So again, I don't see it plateauing. I think, as Brandon, you mentioned before, there are a lot of unknowns still from like a regulation and governance perspective that I think, we as industry leaders are always paying attention to and seeing how that landscape is going to shift. But of course, the demand and interest doesn't seem to be plateauing. And there's just more and more opportunity for folks to kind of get on board with it.
Where does it intersect, if it does, with AI?
Do you want me to take that? Oh, yes. So I think there's sort of that fine line intersection, right? And I think part of it can't be 100% utilization of AI, or there is sort of that fine line of distinction. But I think there's a level of automation that is happening when it comes to predictive analytics. That's how it can work the hardest. But of course, I think, at least in my perspective, that layer of, human touch is still so prevalent, especially, with still sort of how it's evolving within our practice, at least on bank. There's a little bit less reliance on AI and more concerns about how AI operates autonomously within a bank forum than maybe another e-com brand or another type of client. So that's at least my experience from the AI perspective.
Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, one of the things we're seeing with a lot of clients within our data analytics team is a lot more interdepartmental collaboration. So you look at within an organization, a lot of different departments now coming together and thinking about how they're working together and leveraging analytics, leveraging data modeling to become a lot more effective and empowered as an organization. One of those examples that we've seen a ton is you see finance and human resources coming together. And it's pretty cool to see like how you can look at the profitability, the utilization, the chargeability of an employee. Then you also look at employee happiness, employee satisfaction. You look at how long they stay. We're working with a lot of organizations to kind of combine the two of those, and you can almost getting into a spot where you have more predictability and foresight into how long is someone going to stay, and what type of profile really is someone that is a 1 to 3 year person versus a 5+ year person. And so I think that there's a ton of different technology integrations that comes into play there. So I think as predictive analytics, as AI comes into the fold more and more, I mean, it's everywhere now, right? Like every single technology is figuring out how if they haven't already, how they bake AI into what they do. So I think you're going to see, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of evolves and at what rate, and how much we can keep up with it too. I think that's one of the things with technology is, does technology ever become far smarter than yourself? And that's something that you got to stay ahead of. So I think that from a undergrad and a graduate standpoint, it's a really cool opportunity to help kind of the next generation get ahead of that.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
I'm gonna just add something, and Meredith, I think you'll probably appreciate this too, because I also come to this by way of social sciences. Basically, I come from a behavioral psychology and cultural anthropology background, so what I'm about to say is very self-serving in that regard, but also gives a lot of credit to all of the educators in my past who would be baffled that I am at an analytics presentation right now, because that wasn't necessarily the goal. But I think within that, what I have learned, in developing, the deeper technical knowledge is how important the world of psychology, sociology, and anthropology is to this practice. And so as you think, like as I was listening to you talk, Colin, this might even be one of those competency, like what skills later, like I would highly recommend people look into behavioral psychology, because as we understand AI, our knowledge of AI is only going to be good as our knowledge of I. It's only going to be good as our knowledge of how we as human beings actually function, make decisions. And we're going to learn a whole bunch of new things about ourselves of when we're presented with something that maybe seems logical, but isn't. And that level of cognitive dissonance is going to play out in a macro level in fascinating ways. And I would highly recommend anyone kind of getting in to the hard science part of it also understands the social structure part of it.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's incredible. I've worked with people previously that understand how you talked about the storytelling before, your ability to really understand someone and their motivations, and not in an opportunistic way, but like or in a not taking advantage of it way, but really just thinking about how do you connect the dots between, as humans, we just want what we want, and we're starting to want it quicker than ever, which makes it really hard, right? So I think that's really important. And I think that, shoot, if you think about more, you guys at McCormick really think about what do people want. I think I'd love to know that aspect of how you guys are helping, like, think about who wants certain products, seasonings, spices. Like, that's got to be pretty cool. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of curious going into this.
No, that's where I was going to go with it for a closing thought, because we've got about 4 minutes left. But more, Colin's point, I think, in terms of framing that, how does, your role kind of intersect with the flavor forecast, if that's an appropriate.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I can take zero credit for the flavor forecast. For those of you who don't know, flavor forecast is something we've been doing, probably 20, 25 years. And it's something that comes out every year, sort of like a yearbook. And it talks about the flavors that are emerging. But by emerging, what we often talk about is like 3 or 5 years out. So like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like we called Chipotle chili 5 years before it started to hit mainstream, or lavender. Like it's sort of what's coming, but coming like, still, as I said, kind of 5 years out. And it's really, so as I said, I can't take any credit for it, but it's a really interesting process to develop those insights, because a lot of, and again, I'm sort of speaking based on what I've heard by being just through osmosis, essentially, is, it's talking to chefs and restaurant operators to say, because what's interesting, as you think about the flavor space, a lot of the, what we might see at the grocery store starts out in restaurants. And so restaurants are really sort of the nexus of where a lot of sort of the innovation happens. And so if it's in a funky restaurant today, you're probably going to see it in the grocery store in 5 years. And so as we think about flavor forecast, it's talking to chefs. A lot of it is going to funky food towns like New York City and sort of seeing what's on menus there, and then doing focus groups. But and then, of course, a big part of our business at McCormick. So, a big part of the business is the part that you might see at Kroger or Safeway or Albertsons or whatever, the stuff you see on the shelves. But another big part of the business is, well, there's 2 other pieces. It's creating the flavors for Outback's back of house, or creating the flavors for Kentucky Fried Chicken, but also creating the flavors for the sauce that goes in, canned peaches. You buy canned peaches at the grocery store and it comes in that sauce stuff. We create the flavor for that, right? So as we think about that, part of it is working with big clients to understand what are the flavors that you're interested in innovating against, and eventually those will become mainstream. So so flavor forecast is a really fun, as I said, it's almost like a yearbook that we come out with every year. It's really fun. The other thing that I love is it has really funky recipes in it. So it's sort of a look at like, what are the flavors that are going to be, that you're going to start to hear about in the next few years. But it's also, we as part of it, have like a, sort of I don't know, a few dozen recipes that we publish. So if you're looking to impress your friends at your next dinner party, Flavor Forecast is a great place to go to just kind of find some really cool recipes and really cool ways to show off some interesting flavors.
Great, thanks, Maura. So Trish, I'll kick it to you to kind of close this out here, kind of right on time.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's perfect timing. So first, thank you to Colin, Lauren, Brandon, Meredith, for your time tonight, your insights, your knowledge. We're so interesting and so informative. I wish this could go on forever, that we could, this has just been so interesting to listen to. Thank you also to everyone joining us on the call tonight. Our next event in the series is February 8th. We're going to take a little break over the holidays. It's on supply chain 2023 and beyond, forging the future by applying pandemic era wisdom. So it should be really interesting, kind of piggybacking on this a little bit, because obviously supply chain uses a lot of analytics as well. So join us for that. But again, thank you all for your time. And in our sports theme, go Ravens tonight. So have a good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.